Game development explained. No theory, just what works.
Picture this, right? You're working on a massive project. Everything is totally on track.
Which is rare, but yeah.
Right, a minor miracle.
Yeah.
But you've got your schedule locked in, your milestones are clearly defined, your morning coffee is perfectly brewed, and you're finally in the zone.
The dream state.
Exactly. And then someone, maybe a colleague or maybe your boss, maybe a client, they just drop a quick, entirely innocent suggestion on your desk or like in your chat window.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They just say, hey, what if we just added this one little thing?
It is arguably the most dangerous word spoken in any modern workplace.
It sounds so harmless, but within days, that innocent off-the-cuff suggestion has completely derailed your entire week.
Oh, easily.
Maybe your entire month, honestly. And the craziest part of this whole scenario is that when you look back at the wreckage of your schedule, you can't even point to what went wrong.
Right, because there was no fire.
Exactly. There was no massive disaster. The servers didn't catch fire. Nobody, deleted the main database. There was just this quiet, agonizing evaporation of your time.
Yeah, it is a diagnostic nightmare for managers.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the time is gone, the energy of the team is completely drained, but the underlying cause remains totally invisible to traditional metrics.
It really does.
Like you look at the tracking software, Jira or whatever, and it just looks like everyone was working hard.
Which is exactly why we are plunging into this today. So we have a really fascinating document in front of us exploring a concept called Brandolini's Law in game development.
It's such a good read.
It really is. It specifically looks at why, quote unquote, cheap ideas become the absolute most expensive production killers imaginable.
Yeah.
And I want to say right up front to you listening, whether you are managing a massive technical team or planning a marketing campaign, trying to launch a startup, or honestly just trying to organize your own daily routine.
Like your personal life.
Totally. Understanding this hidden drain on your resources is, it's the ultimate shortcut to reclaiming your attention. Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how to stop endlessly evaluating possibilities so we can actually get back to building things.
And, while the lens here is game development, the psychology and the systems level failures happening in these studios, they're universal.
Oh, 100%.
We are really talking about how human beings handle complex, interdependent systems and how genuinely good intentions can end up completely sabotaging execution.
So let's get into the actual mechanics of this. When a massive project is running late, and video games are notoriously consistently delayed.
Almost universally. Yeah.
Right. The postmortems usually round up the usual suspects. You see the same bullet points on the slide deck explaining the delay to the board.
Yeah, you see things like engine limitations, meaning the software fundamentally couldn't render what the artists wanted.
Right. The tech just wasn't there.
Exactly. Or you see unrealistic deadlines handed down by executives who, frankly, don't understand the workflow.
Which happens a lot.
All the time. Sometimes it's a lack of senior experience on the team or just fundamentally poor initial planning.
And those are real factors. But what's fascinating here is the assertion that in many modern, well-funded, highly experienced studios, the actual disease that's quietly destroying the production schedule, it doesn't show up in any bug tracker.
No, it doesn't.
It's not a line of bad code. It's an asymmetry in how ideas enter a system versus how they actually leave it.
And this brings us to Brandolini's Law. So it was originally coined by a programmer named Alberto Brandolini in the context of internet arguments and misinformation.
Right. I've heard it called the bullshit asymmetry principle.
Yes, that's the informal name for it. But when we apply it to creative production, the law states something profound.
Okay, lay it on us.
The amount of energy needed to refute a bad idea is an order of magnitude larger than the energy needed to produce it.
Okay, an order of magnitude, we really need to pause on that. Yeah.
The energy to prove an idea shouldn't happen is vastly, exponentially greater than the energy it took to just casually say it out loud.
Exactly. Just think about the practical application of that in a software environment. Someone can type a suggestion into a company chat channel in maybe 10 seconds.
Just a quick little ping.
Right. Let's say it's an action game and a producer types, hey, what if the players could tame the wild wolves they encounter?
Okay, sounds cool.
10 seconds to formulate, 10 seconds to type. But for a professional team to responsibly evaluate that 10-second thought, that requires a massive cascade of highly technical investigations.
I really want to break down that cascade because it's not just people sitting around pondering the wolf idea.
No, not at all.
To evaluate the wolf idea, you need your design team to figure out the balance implications. You need the technical directors to investigate the AI architecture.
Right, the pathfinding and all that.
Yeah. You need the animation pipeline checked. Like, do we even have the skeleton rigs for a wolf being pet? You have to check memory budgets. It's huge. It is. And even if the team spends, say, 3 whole days doing all of that investigation and ultimately comes back and says, no, we cannot do this, it breaks the memory budget and the AI pathfinding, well, the damage is already done.
The time is gone.
They've paid a massive price. Dozens of hours of senior-level attention have been spent just proving that the idea was unworkable.
And when this pattern repeats, right, when those 10-second messages keep firing off and triggering dozens of hours of evaluation, the project accumulates this hidden weight.
Yes.
The source calls it decisional debt. Now, we hear a lot about technical debt in software and business. How does decisional debt actually differ from that?
It's a really crucial distinction. So technical debt is almost always a conscious compromise.
A choice.
Exactly. A development team looks at the calendar and says, look, we know this specific piece of code is messy and not scalable, but we have to ship this demo to the publisher by Friday.
So they just hack it together?
Right. They duct tape it together now, take on the debt, and they promise to rebuild it properly next month.
Yeah.
You take on the debt to buy speed in the short term.
That makes sense.
But decisional debt is entirely different. It is the accumulated invisible cost of repeatedly examining ideas whose real value to the project was never even established in the first place.
Wow.
You aren't buying speed. You aren't buying anything. You are literally just burning your schedule.
Let me try to visualize this for a second. Generating an idea in this kind of complex environment is, it's like dropping a single drop of dark blue dye into a massive glass of crystal clear water.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. It takes 1 second to squeeze the dropper, just one tiny drop. But the moment it hits the water, it disperses everywhere. It touches every single molecule.
Yep.
And if you look at the glass and decide, actually, I didn't want the water to be blue, you can't just reach in and pull the drop back out.
Not at all.
You have to run that entire glass of water through a complex, time-consuming, expensive filtration system to extract the dye and get the water clear again.
That analogy maps perfectly to the human cost of the filtration process in a studio. Because your filtration system isn't a machine.
Right.
It is made up of your most expensive, most senior talent. It's your lead engineer, your lead system designer, your executive producer.
The heavy hitters?
The heaviest. They're the only ones with enough holistic knowledge of the project to filter that drop of dye out of the water. Every single time a casual idea drops, your top talent has to stop building the actual product to run the filter.
But I have to push back here because I can hear you listening and practically screaming at your device.
So let's hear it.
Since we were in elementary school, we've been taught the golden rule of brainstorming, right? There are no bad ideas.
Right.
We are taught that innovation requires a free flow of thoughts, that you have to break things to make breakthroughs. If we start treating collaboration and idea generation as a form of debt, aren't we just building a miserable, anti-creative workplace?
I'm really glad you brought that up because it is the most common defense of this behavior.
Right.
But we have to separate the phases of creation here.
Okay. How so?
In pre-production, so the very beginning of a project, when you are trying to find the fun, figure out the market fit, and establish the core pillars, that free flow of ideas is absolutely essential.
Want a lot of ideas.
You want as much dye in the water as possible to see what colors you can make. But once a project enters active production, once the tracks are laid, the budget is locked, and a team of 200 people is trying to build a highly complex machine.
The rules change.
The rules change completely.
So the danger is that decisional debt masquerades as healthy curiosity.
Exactly. It wears the costume of good communication. That's why teams don't realize they are accumulating it. They think they're just being highly collaborative.
We're just talking.
We're brainstorming.
Right.
They don't realize the project is stalling until they look up 2 months later and realize they haven't actually built any new features. They've just spent 8 weeks in meetings evaluating what they might build. They are continuously filtering the water instead of drinking it.
That transition from pre-production to production is so critical. And it leads us to why certain environments, specifically game development, act as a magnifying glass for Brandolini's Law. It comes down to the fundamental nature of what a video game actually is, because games are not modular products.
No, they aren't. If you are manufacturing a car, The team designing the physical shape of the steering wheel and the team designing the circuitry for the taillights, they can work relatively independently.
Right.
If the design team decides to make the taillights slightly more angular, it doesn't suddenly cause the steering wheel to detach from the dashboard. The systems have clear boundaries, but modern video games, they are interdependent ecosystems of systems.
An ecosystem of systems, a change in one component propagates everywhere.
Everywhere. Let me give you a concrete example of how this chain reaction works.
Please.
A designer decides to introduce a new combat mechanic, maybe a grappling hook. Everyone loves a grappling hook. But that grappling hook immediately influences how the artificial intelligence needs to behave, because now enemies need to know how to react when they are pulled.
Right, they can't just stand there.
Exactly. And that new AI behavior requires new animation blending, the physical way that digital models transition from standing to being yanked through the air to recovering.
Which takes a ton of work.
A massive amount.
Yeah.
And then those new rapid animations affect the visual readability of the level design. Suddenly, the environments feel too small because the player is moving too fast.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think about the level design.
Right. That changes how the player behaves, which forces a complete rebalancing of the game's economy and difficulty. The moment that single grappling hook enters the conversation, it sends massive shockwaves through every single layer of the software stack.
And this brings us to a concept called the invisible complexity, or the iceberg effect, which I think is the most illuminating part of this whole discussion.
It really paints the picture.
Yeah. When someone suggests an idea, they are almost always describing a visible outcome. They are describing the tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water.
Because that's how we experience the world.
Right.
We experience outcomes. We say things like, let's add dynamic weather to the game, or let's make the non-player characters, the NPCs, react emotionally to our choices.
Or let's allow players to modify their weapons in real time.
Exactly.
And when you say those things out loud, they sound amazing. As a player, I want all of that. It sounds simple because in the real world, it is simple. It's just rain falling from the sky, right? It's just an NPC frowning.
Yeah.
But what actually happens under the water?
The infrastructure hiding underwater is terrifying. Let's take dynamic weather as an example. When a stakeholder says, let's add rain, the rendering engineers immediately have to figure out how light refracts through thousands of individual particle effects without crashing the graphics card.
Just to make it look wet.
Just to make it look wet. Then the AI programmers have to ask, do the enemy soldiers seek shelter when it rains? If they seek shelter, do they abandon their guard posts?
Which completely changes the stealth mechanics.
Totally breaks them. Then the animation team has to figure out if characters need new shivering animations and how those blend with shooting animations. The audio engineers have to build dynamic soundscapes because footsteps sound completely different in wet mud versus dry dirt.
Oh, and don't forget the QA testers. If there is a crucial, dramatic, cinematic sequence where two characters are whispering to each other, what happens if the dynamic weather system randomly spawns a hurricane in the background?
Right.
Can you still hear the dialogue? Does it ruin the emotional moment? And on top of all of that, the platform engineers are sweating because they have to guarantee this entire simulation won't make the gaming console overheat and crash.
That is the mass of the iceberg. And the real bottleneck here, the true friction point, isn't a lack of skill.
Right.
It isn't that designers don't understand that code is hard, or that programmers don't understand that games need to be fun. In a mature studio, these people are incredibly smart and cross-trained. The difficulty is that no single human being on Earth holds the entire game in their head.
So the full iceberg only becomes visible when you combine all these different perspectives.
Precisely. The AI programmer knows the pathfinding implications. The audio engineer knows the memory limits of the sound channels. An idea that seems totally straightforward to a lead designer might harbor catastrophic consequences that are only revealed when the QA lead and the graphics programmer sit in a room and look at it together.
But wait, if it takes the entire team's collective, synchronized expertise just to calculate the true cost of a one-line idea, aren't you essentially saying that collaboration is a liability? It sounds like we are punishing people for talking to each other.
I actually reframe that. It's not that communication is a liability. It is that unfiltered communication is incredibly expensive.
Ah, unfiltered.
Yes. Expressing the idea is trivial. But because the true cost of the iceberg is distributed across the minds of 5 different specialists, evaluating the idea forces those highly paid specialists to stop their actual work.
To break their flow state.
Exactly. Break their flow state, get into a meeting, and collaboratively calculate that hidden mass. The asymmetry of Brandolini's law emerges exactly at this intersection. Getting 5 distinct experts to synchronize their brains just to determine if an idea is viable costs a fortune and time. You aren't punishing collaboration. You are recognizing its true metabolic cost to the organization.
The metabolic cost of collaboration, that paints a totally different picture of the workplace.
It really does.
It shifts the blame away from bad communication and places it squarely on the crushing weight of required synchronization, which naturally leads to the next question.
Which is?
If the iceberg is this dangerous and investigating it costs this much time, why do teams keep steering their ships right toward it? Why don't they just say, no, we aren't doing weather and move on?
Because human psychology, combined with modern corporate culture, actively encourages them to steer toward the iceberg. We have to look at the cultural traps that allow Brandolini's law to thrive.
Let's talk about the yes and culture. This comes from improv comedy, right?
Yes, exactly.
The rule is that you never shut down your partner's contribution. You accept whatever premise they introduce and you add to it. And tech companies, design firms, game studios, they have universally adopted this as the holy grail of creative culture.
And again, in early brainstorming, it is fantastic. But in late-stage production, yes and is a psychological trap.
Why?
Because in a highly collaborative environment, rejecting a colleague's idea quickly feels really aggressive. It feels dismissive. You don't want to be the person who sits in a meeting and says, no, that's a bad idea, or no, we don't have the budget for that.
Right, nobody wants to be the wet blanket. So what do we do instead? We default to softer, safer, collaborative-sounding phrases. We use the polite deferral. We say things like, let's look into it, or that's super interesting, it might be worth exploring.
And those phrases are the sound of decisional debt being minted.
Wow.
They feel polite in the moment.
Yeah.
They maintain a positive, friendly atmosphere in the meeting room. But every single time a manager says, let's look into it, they are quietly initiating a costly chain of evaluation work. They're authorizing a team of divers to go down into the freezing water and measure the iceberg.
It's the illusion of progress. You feel like you're managing the project well because you're investigating avenues, but you're actually just paralyzing the team. And this feeds directly into a concept that I find absolutely fascinating. Feature gravity.
Feature gravity describes the phenomenon where systems that already exist within a project naturally attract logical extensions.
Logical extensions.
Right. The sheer gravity of an existing feature pulls new ideas into its orbit simply because they make sense conceptually.
The examples of this from the source are so clear. Let's say your game has a system where the player can ride a horse. Because the horse exists in the code, someone will naturally look at it and say, well, since we have a horse, we should probably add grooming mechanics so the player bonds with it.
Yeah.
And if we have grooming, we should have saddle customization. Or you implement that weather system we talked about. The natural thought process is, since we have weather, it only makes sense to add seasonal crops that need rain, or environmental hazards like getting struck by lightning.
Or if you add daily schedules to the NPCs so they go to sleep at night, someone will inevitably say, since they have sleep schedules, we should add emotional reactions or reputation tracking if the player wakes them up in the middle of the night.
And here's where it gets incredibly insidious. Every single one of those additions, the grooming, the lightning, the sleepy NPCs, they all feel entirely reasonable in isolation. They make logical sense.
They absolutely do. If you have a horse, of course, you should be able to brush it. It increases immersion. It makes the world feel alive.
Yeah, but think about what that actually looks like in practice, even outside of game dev. Let's look at your world, the listener's world. Say you are preparing a slide deck for a crucial high-stakes presentation.
Oh, this happens all the time.
You've got 5 core slides outlining your Q3 revenue strategy. It's tight, it's punchy. You show it to a colleague for feedback, and they say, well, since you're already talking about Q3 revenue, it's totally logical to add a slide about the new marketing hires that will drive that revenue. And since we're mentioning marketing, let's just add a quick breakdown of the social media metrics to give it context.
That is feature gravity at work in the corporate world.
Yeah.
The core slide deck acts as the gravitational center, pulling in logical adjacent data.
Yes. Every single addition feels perfectly reasonable and helpful in the moment. But suddenly, your tight 5-minute presentation about core revenue is a 40-minute sprawling mess of charts, and your main point is completely buried. Collectively, these logical additions pull the center of gravity entirely away from the core loop of what you're trying to achieve.
And we really need to psychoanalyze the intention here.
What do you mean?
The intention behind the colleague suggesting the marketing slide or the designer suggesting the horse grooming. It is almost always constructive. People genuinely want to make the product better.
They're trying to help.
Right. But that constructive, helpful intention is what makes the trap so dangerous. If someone suggests a terrible idea, it's easy to say no. But when someone suggests a logical idea, you feel obligated to entertain it.
Because it makes sense.
Exactly. And the project slowly becomes defined by its expanding peripheral features rather than by the strength of its core loop. The team stops moving forward toward delivery, and they just end up orbiting these features, endlessly polishing things that don't actually matter to the final product.
Orbiting features instead of shipping the product, that is a gut punch.
It's a sad reality for a lot of studios.
So we've established the high-level theory. We understand the asymmetry of the law, the crushing weight of the iceberg, and the cultural traps of yes and feature gravity. But how does this actually manifest on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.?
On the ground level.
Exactly. Let's get down to the ground level and look at the 4 horsemen of Brandolini chaos. These are the specific, everyday workflow patterns where this debt is actually generated.
These 4 patterns are where the theory becomes painfully practical. Every professional is going to recognize these behaviors.
Let's break them down. Horseman number 1 is the drive-by suggestion, or the Slack suggestion.
This is a classic of the remote work era. A quick idea dropped into a team channel. What if the player could upgrade their weapons anywhere in the world instead of only at the home base?
It's just a thought. The person who typed it probably didn't think twice. They typed it between sips of coffee while waiting for a meeting to start.
Right, but it hits a public channel. It sparks curiosity. A short thread appears beneath it. Someone replies, "Oh, that sounds interesting. It would save the players so much running back and forth."
And then
Someone else, maybe a producer or lead designer, chimes in and asks the fatal question. How difficult would that actually be to implement?
And boom, the trap snaps shut.
Because that question demands an answer from an expert. Someone now has to investigate. A 10-second chat message has just quietly transformed into several hours of design and engineering analysis.
Let me guess. The UI team has to figure out how to render the upgrade menu in the middle of a forest.
Yes. And the engineering team has to figure out the memory costs of loading upgrade assets everywhere in the world instead of just in one secure location. The game balancers have to figure out if being able to upgrade mid-battle ruins the difficulty curve. The 10-second message just burned 2 days of collective time.
Okay, horseman number 2, the meeting add-on. I am going to publicly confess right now that I am incredibly guilty of this one.
We all are.
You get to the end of a long meeting, everyone is packing up their laptops, you have 3 minutes left on the calendar invite, and someone throws a total curveball idea into the room.
And because you only have 3 minutes, the group obviously lacks the time to evaluate it properly or argue about it.
Yeah.
So how does the room respond?
Someone, usually the person running the meeting, says, "That's a really interesting point. Let's explore that later."
Let's explore that later. It sounds like good meeting management, but it is actually a placeholder decision. It effectively schedules future invisible work without any kind of decision framework.
Just blind commitment.
It guarantees that someone's time will be spent on this later, but without any commitment to actually implementing the idea. It is the purest form of decisional debt.
It's literally like putting a massive charge on a company credit card and just throwing away the receipt. You know the bill is going to come due, you know you have to pay it, but you don't even know what you bought or if you needed it.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, the 3rd horseman, feature accretion.
This ties heavily back to feature gravity. The justification here is a potent mix of the sunk cost fallacy and engineering optimism. The phrase you will hear is, "We already built half of this system, so extending it should be easy."
It's just one more button on the menu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The UI architecture is already there, just add a toggle. But as we know from the iceberg effect, it is never just a toggle.
Right.
Adding a toggle requires testing the toggle, ensuring the toggle saves to the player's profile properly, ensuring the toggle doesn't conflict with other settings. The cumulative effect of these seemingly harmless, easy extensions, quietly, slowly transforms the entire scope of the project.
And the final one, the 4th pattern, design drift. This one felt a little more subtle, a little more psychological.
It happens almost exclusively on long projects. When a team works on something for 2, 3, or 4 years, the original crystal clear vision starts to get fuzzy.
People forget what they're making.
Basically, yeah. The pillars you established in year 1 start to erode. Different team members naturally start describing the game slightly differently in their own heads based on what they've been working on.
It's like a corporate game of telephone over 4 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because they perceive the current state of the game differently, they start spawning new ideas simply to fix these perceived misalignments.
Can you give an example?
Sure. An engineer might say, I thought this was supposed to be a fast-paced run-and-gun shooter. Why is this slow stealth section here? We need to add an adrenaline mechanic to the stealth section to speed it up.
I see.
And these ideas trigger massive analysis and debate just to bring everyone back to a baseline vision that they didn't even realize they had drifted away from.
But all of these patterns, the casual Slack messages, the meeting add-ons, the design drift, they all lead to what I consider the most devastating part of this whole analysis, the ultimate hidden cost, which it's not just the literal hours lost to meetings and investigations. It is something far more destructive to the human brain. Fragmented attention.
Context switching. This is the silent killer of productivity.
We throw the term context switching around a lot in corporate wellness seminars, but I want to deeply explain what that actually means for a specialist's brain. What is happening cognitively when an engineer is interrupted?
Let's use a computer's RAM, its random access memory, as an analogy. When a senior programmer is deep into coding a complex system, say a physics engine for how vehicles handle on different terrains,
Okay.
they have loaded a massive amount of highly specific, abstract information into their working memory. They're holding the architecture of the code, the mathematical variables, the friction coefficients, all of it in their head simultaneously. It takes them maybe 30 minutes of deep focus just to build that mental model.
They are completely in the flow state.
They are entirely submerged. Now, if you ping them on Slack and ask them to quickly evaluate whether a sword should be upgradable at a campfire, what happens?
Did they lose it all?
Yes. They have to drop all that physics architecture out of their mental RAM. They have to load in the gameplay systems, evaluate your idea about the sword, formulate a response, and then try to reload the entire physics architecture back into their head so they can resume working.
And that reloading process takes time.
It takes an immense amount of time and cognitive energy. Studies show it can take over 20 minutes to fully regain a deep state of concentration after a single interruption.
20 minutes from one Slack ping.
Yes. When weak ideas repeatedly enter the system, specialists are constantly flushing and reloading their mental RAM. Context switching slows down every single discipline across the studio. As a result, decision cycles artificially lengthen. Because everyone is always shifting focus, confidence in the overall priorities decreases, and burnout skyrockets.
But again, I have to play the role of the skeptical manager here, because if I'm running a studio, I want my teams communicating. Surely good communication requires evaluating each other's ideas. Is the argument really that a 10-second chat message stops the entire assembly line? Isn't that overstating the fragility of the team?
I'd actually argue it's understating it, but not for the reason you think. It's not that a single 10-second message stops the line forever. It's the aggregate effect over months.
Okay, the habit of it.
Right. The profound warning here is about habit formation. Over time, if this isn't strictly managed, the team develops an unconscious organizational habit where every idea, no matter how casual, is treated as if it deserves careful, senior-level consideration.
And that's bad.
It's fatal. Once that habit takes root, the entire production pipeline quietly shifts. The team literally stops building the game and starts evaluating possibilities. It is a gradual, highly destructive shift that consumes the studio's most precious, unrenewable resource, their collective attention.
Stops building the game and starts evaluating possibilities.
Yeah.
That is chilling. And to make this theoretical cost painfully, excruciatingly concrete, we have to look at the case study provided in the analysis.
Yes, the anatomy of a disaster.
Exactly. The emotional NPC case study. This is where we get to see Brandolini's Law destroy a schedule in real time, blow by blow.
It's a brilliant inclusion in the text because it grounds all this high-level systems theory into a narrative that any developer will instantly recognize.
Let's set the scene for the listener, because the context is vital here. We are looking at a mid-sized development team. They're building a simulation or management-style game, and things are going incredibly well.
Production is stable.
Yeah. They are hitting their milestones on time. The core loop of the game, the main thing you do over and over, is already playable and fun. This is not a project in crisis. It's a healthy, functioning studio.
That is the most important detail of the entire story. They are not desperate for ideas.
Then comes the trigger. During a routine review of the current build, a stakeholder, maybe an executive or a publisher, makes a suggestion. They say, it would be great if the NPCs reacted emotionally when the player makes a mistake.
It sounds so innocent.
It sounds charming. It fits the tone of a simulation game perfectly. And crucially, it seems cheap.
Because the game already has dialogue systems.
Right, it already has character animations. The stakeholder is looking at the visible tip of the iceberg and thinking, we have the pieces, just put them together. Nobody in the room rejects the idea. The team relies on the polite deferral. They say, great thought, let's investigate the feasibility.
The trap is set. Let's look at week 1 of the investigation.
Right, the investigation kicks off across 2 separate departments. First, design. 2 designers sit down to map out how these emotional reactions will actually work.
They start asking the basic behavioral questions. Okay, the player messes up the simulation. How should the NPC react? Should they become frustrated, sarcastic, embarrassed, amused?
And immediately, they hit a wall. Because they realize that if the NPC gets genuinely frustrated, it might actually annoy the player. Nobody wants to be yelled at by a computer character when they are already struggling to learn the game mechanics.
Yeah.
But if the reaction is too subtle, just a slight sigh or a glance, what's the point of doing it at all? The camera is positioned high above the world. The player won't even see a subtle facial expression. Suddenly, this simple idea explodes into a massive design matrix spreadsheet of emotional weights, visibility metrics, and behavioral triggers.
And while the designers are wrestling with that spreadsheet, we have week 1 in engineering. The AI programmers are asked to look into the feasibility. They open up the behavior tree architecture.
Which is what exactly?
For those who aren't AI engineers, a behavior tree isn't just a list of commands. It's a complex, hierarchical decision matrix that dictates how the artificial intelligence evaluates the world.
It's the digital brain of the character.
Exactly. And the engineers quickly realized that to introduce emotional reactions, they can't just slap a play animation command on top of the existing logic. They need to create entirely new behavioral states within the AI's brain.
And the iceberg reveals itself because those new AI states suddenly touch everything. It touches the quest logic. What if an NPC gets frustrated right when they're supposed to hand you a vital quest item? Do they refuse to give it to you?
That would break the game.
It interrupts pathfinding, too. Do they stop walking along their designated route to sigh in frustration? If they stop walking, do they block a doorway and trap the player? Before the first week is even over, a full technical spike has begun, pulling senior engineers completely off their planned milestone work.
And then we roll into week 2. This is where the pipeline consequences truly hit the fan.
Oh boy. Art and animation get involved. The animation lead looks at what design and engineering are asking for, and they raise a massive, project-threatening red flag.
Let me guess. The rigs.
Yes, they explain that the existing character rigs, so think of a 3D model as a hollow rubber suit. To make it move, you have to build a digital skeleton inside it, which is the rig. The animation lead points out that their rigs completely lack the facial bones necessary for expressive emotions.
Oh, that's brutal.
They have jawbones so they can talk, but they don't have the bones to smirk or scowl or widen their eyes.
And fixing that isn't a simple patch. To add facial bones, the art team would have to go back to the original source files, rebuild the skeletons, carefully repaint the digital weights so the rubber suit deforms correctly when the new bones move, re-export every single character asset in the game, and then completely modify the animation blending system so a character can run and scowl at the same time. You're talking about months of specialized work.
But wait, the nightmare isn't over because QA, quality assurance, the testing team, they also chime in. The QA lead realizes that if an NPC can suddenly become emotionally reactive and change their state at any given moment, what happens during a highly controlled, scripted, cinematic sequence?
Oh, it could ruin everything.
If the player makes a mistake right as the cinematic triggers, and the NPC enters a frustrated state instead of walking to their mark, it could break the game logic. It could soft lock the mission, meaning the player is trapped, cannot progress, and has to restart their console. The number of testing scenarios required to ensure the game is stable just multiplied by a factor of 100.
So, after all of this, we reach the end of week 2, the final decision.
After 2 full weeks of intense, stressful investigation by the senior-most members of design, engineering, animation, and QA, the team reaches a conclusion.
What is it?
The feature requires massive AI changes, It requires completely rebuilding the animation pipeline. The actual benefit to the player's fun is totally unclear based on the design matrix, and it does absolutely nothing to strengthen the core loop of managing the simulation.
So leadership makes the call, they drop the idea.
They drop it. 2 weeks later, they are exactly where they started. Nothing new has been added to the game. And here is the terrifying punchline of this entire story, the thing that makes my blood run cold when I think about my own workflows.
Nobody did anything wrong.
Nobody behaved irresponsibly. That is the tragedy of it. No one was lazy. No one was malicious. The stakeholder wasn't trying to sabotage the game.
No, they thought they were helping.
The investigation was entirely professional. The designers, engineers, and animators did exactly what you were supposed to do to responsibly evaluate a feature. Yet 2 weeks of senior-level attention were consumed and completely burned to ash just to prove that an idea shouldn't exist. I want you, the listener, to imagine burning 2 weeks of your own life at work, 2 weeks of meetings, planning, stress, and context switching, just to finally be able to say no to a single email suggestion.
It's devastating to morale and momentum. And as the analysis concludes, this case study is Brandolini's Law in its purest form.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad idea, it was a charming idea.
No.
But the asymmetry of the energy required to understand its consequences versus the energy it took the stakeholder to suggest it was catastrophic.
Which brings us to the most vital part of this deep dive. Because we cannot just live in fear of suggestions. We can't ban brainstorming.
No, you'd never make anything new.
Right. We have diagnosed the disease, we understand the invisible debt, and we have seen its terrible symptoms in the emotional NTC story. Now, how do we cure it? Or at least, how do we build an immune system to protect ourselves? Because a source material provides very explicit, actionable mechanisms for doing exactly that.
Yes, and it requires a fundamental philosophical shift in how leadership views idea generation. The goal is not to suppress ideas or create a miserable, anti-creative workplace where everyone is afraid to speak up. Creative exploration is the lifeblood of these projects.
So what is the goal?
The goal is to move the burden of proof earlier in the pipeline.
Move the burden of proof earlier. I love the phrasing of that. Make the idea work for its survival.
Exactly. Instead of the development team having to burn their own energy disproving a casual suggestion, the system should force the idea itself to justify its own existence before it ever reaches the engineers. You need mechanisms that filter out the weak ideas automatically.
The analysis details 5 practical mechanisms to achieve this. Let's go through them, because these are highly applicable outside of game dev, too. Number 1. Pillars as hard gates.
Every project should have core pillars. These are 3 or 4 words that define the fundamental identity of what you are making. The argument here is that these pillars cannot just be inspirational posters on a wall. They must act as fast, ruthless filters for decision-making.
Give me an example.
The example provided is perfect. Let's say your game's pillars are speed and adrenaline. It's a fast-paced arcade shooter. Someone suggests, hey, what if we added realistic inventory weight? So carrying too many guns slows the player down.
If you apply the pillar as a hard gate, what happens?
It fails instantly. Realistic weight actively, mathematically contradicts the pillars of speed and adrenaline. You don't need a meeting. You don't need an engineering spike to check the UI. You don't need to consult QA. You just look at the pillar and say, that doesn't fit, and the idea dies in 30 seconds. The energy of the team is protected.
Brilliant. Okay, mechanism number 2, structured requests. The concept here is introducing productive friction.
This is specifically designed to stop the Slack suggestion dead in its tracks. If an idea is going to affect production, it cannot just be a chat message. It must pass through a structured template. It has to answer 3 brutal, specific questions.
And these questions are fantastic. First, what specific player problem does this solve? Second, which interconnected systems does this affect? And the third one, which is the absolute kicker, what feature will we remove to make room for it?
That third question is the reality check that changes behavior. Production is a zero-sum game of time and resources. If you want to add grooming the horse, what are you cutting to pay for it?
Right. Are we cutting the final boss fight? Are we cutting the multiplayer mode?
Exactly. By forcing the person suggesting the idea to answer these questions, you make the hidden costs visible to them. The friction forces them to look at the iceberg. Many cheap ideas simply disappear because the person suggesting them realizes it isn't worth the effort to fill out the form, let alone sacrifice another feature.
It's noted that friction is not bureaucracy. It is protection. Let me offer an analogy here to visualize this. These filters, this productive friction, it operates exactly like a bouncer at a busy, exclusive nightclub.
Let's take that a step further. How does the bouncer manage the energy?
Well, the bouncer at the door isn't there because they hate the concept of dancing. They don't hate fun. They are there specifically to manage the capacity and the safety of the building. If they let every single person who wants to come in just walk through the door immediately, the club becomes dangerously overcrowded.
Nobody can move.
Right. People can't get drinks, the music gets drowned out by shouting, and the party stops entirely. The bouncer creates productive friction at the door. They make people wait. They check IDs. And sure, the people outside in the line might be annoyed by the friction, but if the bouncer is doing their job right, the people inside have the space and the energy to actually dance and have a great time.
That is exactly the dynamic. The studio is the club. The ideas are the line around the block. If you let every idea in, production grinds to a halt and no one has fun, which leads perfectly into the third mechanism: decision ownership.
Right. Someone has to actually put on the suit and be the bouncer.
Exactly. Every system, every pipeline must have a designated owner who has the clear, unquestioned authority to say no quickly. If decisions are always made by a democratic committee of 10 people, discussions will continue indefinitely.
Everyone will default to the polite, let's look into it, to avoid conflict.
Yes. Ownership creates closure. One person has the authority to look at the idea, measure it against the pillars and say, no, we aren't doing that, and the team can instantly move on.
Mechanism number 4, default parking.
This acts as a psychological release valve for the yes-and culture. We know people want to share ideas, and we don't want to foster an environment where people feel silenced. So healthy teams maintain exploration backlogs, often called parking lots.
So how do you use it in a meeting?
When an idea comes up, instead of using the toxic phrase, let's explore that later, which implies future evaluation work, you change the vocabulary. You say, that's a great idea. Let's put it in the parking lot for the sequel or for post-launch DLC.
It's a subtle but massive difference. The idea gets to live on a whiteboard somewhere. The person who suggested it feels heard and validated, but it doesn't trigger any immediate evaluation work. It's safe. It's parked. And finally, mechanism number 5. Opportunity cost as a visible metric.
This is a job specifically for leadership. Whenever an idea manages to pass the filters and is actually discussed, leadership must explicitly frame the conversation around trade-offs. You don't just ask, is dynamic weather good? You state the cost. If we investigate this weather system, physics optimization will slip by 2 weeks.
It changes the entire tenor of the conversation. It takes it from a dreamy space of limitless curiosity to a grounded space of harsh prioritization. You aren't saying no, weather is bad. You're forcing the room to answer. Is weather better than having a stable frame rate in the physics engine?
Exactly. It redefines the role of leadership in a creative space, which I think is the most profound takeaway from this entire analysis. The real role of a producer, a director, or a manager isn't to control ideas. It isn't to just crack the whip on deadlines and yell at people to work faster. Their primary sacred responsibility is to protect the energy of the team.
Because, as the analysis concludes so powerfully, the most valuable asset in any studio or any business or any personal endeavor isn't the proprietary software engine. It isn't the art style or the marketing budget or the intellectual property. It is the collective attention of the team. That is your rarest, most fragile resource.
And Brandolini's Law shows us exactly how fast that collective attention can be drained by things that seem entirely free.
Man, what a journey this has been. Let's do a quick recap of the terrain we've covered today. We started by looking at the invisible delays that plague our projects, discovering the crushing, silent weight of decisional debt.
The dye in the water.
The dye in the water, exactly. We explored why complex projects act as a magnifying glass for this debt, thanks to the interconnected iceberg effect, where the true, terrifying cost of an idea is hidden beneath the surface of a simple suggestion.
The dynamic weather.
Great. We looked at the cultural traps we fall into, the polite but deadly, let's look into it, the gravitational pull of feature creep, and how our beloved yes-and nature gets weaponized against our own schedules. We saw the true horror of a simple Slack suggestion burning down 2 weeks of senior-level work in the emotional NPC case study. And finally, we looked at how to fight back by building bouncers at the door, using pillars, structured requests, and visible opportunity cost to aggressively protect our attention.
It is a masterclass in systems thinking, but more importantly, it's a masterclass in cognitive energy management.
It really is. And to you listening, I want to reiterate something crucial. Setting up these filters, creating this productive friction, saying no quickly to your colleagues or your boss, it isn't mean.
Not at all.
It isn't being uncollaborative or difficult. It is the exact opposite. Saying no to the peripheral noise is the only way you preserve the energy to say yes to the things that truly matter, is how you actually get things shipped.
You have to guard the core loop of your project.
Guard the core loop. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've spent this entire time talking about teams and studios and corporate pipelines, but I want you to turn this lens inward for a second.
Oh, this is good.
If collective attention is our most valuable asset in the workplace, and if studios have to spend massive amounts of energy building filters to protect themselves from internal ideas from their own well-meaning teammates, how much invisible, crushing decisional debt are we carrying around in our personal lives?
Wow.
Think about it. Think about the constant, never-ending stream of cheap suggestions we get every single day from the outside world. From social media, from algorithmic feeds, from self-help articles telling us what we just need to add to our daily routines to be happy or productive.
Just add a 5 a.m. ice bath.
Yes, just add a 20-step gratitude journaling process. Just start meal prepping this highly complex diet. Every single one of those external suggestions is a drop of dye in your water. It forces your brain to evaluate it. It creates the iceberg effect in your own schedule. It fragments your personal attention and pulls you away from what you actually care about. Are we spending our own lives building our personal core loops, the things that truly matter to us and bring us joy, or are we just constantly, exhaustingly evaluating external possibilities?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. We might need to build some ruthless bouncers for our own minds.
We absolutely do. Be the bouncer of your own attention. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Guard your time, protect your energy, and we will catch you on the next one.
If this is useful, subscribe.
New breakdowns every week.